When love transforms into obsession, the line between possession and crime becomes as fragile as a strand of hair. Can you imagine opening the refrigerator in an ordinary apartment and suddenly seeing a human body part floating in a clear jar of alcohol? This wasn't a scene from a horror movie, but a horrifying reality that unfolded in the heart of bustling Osaka. On the night of January 28, 2025, Osaka Police's emergency hotline 110 suddenly rang with an urgent call. On the other end, a young man was breathing heavily, his voice trembling as he reported that he had just been assaulted by his girlfriend after a violent argument about breaking up. Police patrol cars were immediately dispatched to the apartment address in Kita Ward, central Osaka. When officers entered the apartment, which looked as ordinary as any other, they encountered a breathtakingly tense scene. A young man stood huddled in the corner, his face swollen and bruised, his left cheek bloodied, his nose scraped, his body trembling with fear. Facing him was a 23-year-old girl with a petite frame, sitting motionless on the sofa. Her eyes were as still as a winter lake, cold, empty, and unreadable. Initially, the officers thought this was just another domestic violence case. But when the victim began his testimony, the air in the room suddenly became suffocating. The young man stated that his girlfriend had used a weapon to sever his ring finger, then carefully preserved it in a jar of alcohol in the refrigerator. The story sounded like something from a horror film, but the victim's eyes, filled with genuine terror, weren't fake. Before the officers could recover from the shock, the young man tremblingly pointed toward the kitchen corner. As the refrigerator door slowly opened, among the familiar food containers, there was a glass jar containing a clear liquid. Inside, a small pinkish object was floating. Without needing to look closely, everyone understood this was living evidence of a brutal crime, an actual human finger segment. A bone-chilling atmosphere suddenly enveloped the entire apartment. Police immediately sealed the jar as evidence and brought both individuals to the station for investigation. Behind the walls of that ordinary apartment, how long had this twisted love story been secretly unfolding? How could a human body part become a keepsake carefully stored in the refrigerator like some macabre collectible? Was this just the result of a sudden psychotic break, or was there a calculated, cruel plan that had been brewing for a long time? These questions emerged one by one like puzzle pieces of a horrifying picture. Only when the investigation began would the dark secrets hidden for so long gradually be revealed, making even seasoned police officers shudder at the brutality of twisted love. From the very first minute of interrogation, investigators realized they were dealing with two completely opposing stories. On one side was the victim firmly accusing his girlfriend of torturing him. On the other was the 23-year-old girl calmly denying all accusations. Saki Sato, that was the girlfriend's name, sat in the interrogation room with an eerily calm demeanor. She showed no signs of panic or worry and was even very cooperative when answering questions. But Sato's responses surprised everyone in the room. She insisted that it was actually the victim who had harmed himself, buying an axe and severing his own finger during a mental breakdown. This explanation sounded completely absurd, but Sato told it with such apparent sincerity that it could have swayed some people. However, experienced officers understood they couldn't rely on subjective testimony. Concrete evidence was what could expose the truth hidden behind these seemingly convincing lies. The jar containing the severed finger was immediately sealed carefully and sent directly to the forensic laboratory. After thorough examination, experts reached a clear conclusion. This was indeed the final segment of the ring finger from the victim's left hand, completely severed by an extremely sharp cutting instrument. Notably, the cut was very clean and precise, showing the perpetrator had acted with great determination. This characteristic was completely consistent with a small axe blade or cleaver, exactly as the victim had described the weapon. Not coincidentally, when searching the apartment, police found a short-handled axe hidden in the wardrobe, along with a sharp pair of scissors in the kitchen. Although both items had been cleaned thoroughly, the keen eyes of experts still discovered faint traces of blood on the blade. Using special reagents, they collected samples for analysis. All this crucial evidence was sent for DNA and fingerprint testing. During the apartment search, police found Sato's personal safe, and what was inside made them recoil. The victim's bank book and mobile phone were carefully stored like trophies. This showed that Sato wasn't simply an impulsive abuser. She had a very tight control system, completely controlling her boyfriend's finances and communication capabilities. This was a familiar tactic in domestic violence cases, isolating the victim from the outside world so they couldn't seek help or become independent. From these clues, investigators began to realize they were dealing with a calculated criminal. Sato seemed to have planned in advance to imprison the victim. Stripping away financial autonomy and communication rights was the first step to ensure he couldn't escape her control. While experts examined the scene, another equally important examination was being conducted, examining the injuries on the victim's body. Besides the fresh bruises on his face, the young man's body also had a healed scar on his left chest and the amputated ring finger segment. Evidence that completely matched his testimony about previous torture sessions by his girlfriend. The official examination results confirmed that the victim's left fingertip and part of his left chest had been permanently lost and could not be recovered. These weren't just ordinary wounds, but irreversible damage, clear evidence of the perpetrator's brutality. With such serious injuries, police had sufficient legal grounds to pursue criminal charges. The entire examination record, along with photographs documenting the victim's wounds, were meticulously recorded and entered into the case file as irrefutable evidence. The male victim, age 21, whose real name is being kept confidential at his request for privacy protection, is from Osaka and had no prior criminal record or conflicts with anyone. His life had been normal until he met Sato, the person who turned his love story into a tragedy. The story began in 2023, when the then 19-year-old happened to be browsing social media and came across Sato's cosplay photos. She had a sweet beauty like anime characters stepping out of manga, which immediately caught his attention. He then took the initiative to friend her and sent messages to get acquainted. Although Sato initially seemed rather cold, the young man's sincerity and persistence eventually melted her heart. The couple officially began dating and spent their first months as sweetly as any other couple. No one could have suspected that behind Sato's adorable appearance lurked a dark nature that would turn love into a nightmare. July 2024 marked an important turning point. The victim moved in with Sato at her apartment. And when that apartment door closed, Sato's sweet mask also began to fall. The change occurred gradually and subtly. At first, it was just caring words and reminders that seemed loving. But gradually, these suggestions became inviolable commands. Sato began controlling every minor aspect of her boyfriend's life. She forbade him from contacting old friends, restricted his going out alone, then went as far as confiscating his mobile phone and bank book. Every call or text message he wanted to make had to be approved by her first. From a romantic relationship, the young man gradually realized he was living like a prisoner. The only difference was that his prison cage was decorated with sweet words and affectionate gestures. But the essence was still captivity. According to investigation results, Sato particularly favored young men with gentle, obedient personalities who were easy to control, the complete opposite of strong, independent men with distinct personalities. The victim in this case was the perfect model Sato was looking for, and she cleverly exploited this characteristic to gradually impose her will. Sato's control became comprehensively terrifying. From major decisions about education and work to minor details of daily life, everything had to be approved by her. The young man gradually became a puppet in Sato's hands. However, even under tight control, distress signals still accidentally leaked out. Police records show that in the latter half of 2024, neighbors had witnessed arguing, screaming, and the sound of objects being smashed from Sato's apartment multiple times. At least 4 times they called the police for intervention. But every time officers arrived, Sato would perform perfectly. She would open the door looking fragile, tears in her eyes, explaining that these were just minor spats between young lovers. As for the victim, despite his obviously bruised and swollen face, he would firmly tell police he was fine and refuse to file a complaint. Without a formal complaint, police had no legal grounds for deeper intervention. This terrifying cycle continued until September 2024. After a violent argument triggered by Sato's unreasonable jealousy, she forced her boyfriend to sit still while she conducted a barbaric experiment. In a cold tone, Sato declared that she wanted to test a bizarre idea about whether men's nipples could grow back if cut off. The young man was so terrified that his body seemed paralyzed. Before he could react, Sato had approached with sharp scissors. A quick, merciless cut, the cold metal blade slicing through flesh. Part of the victim's left nipple separated from his body amid heart-wrenching screams of pain. Fresh blood soaked his white t-shirt, the pain making him curl up on the cold floor. The most terrifying thing wasn't the brutal act itself, but Sato's reaction afterward. She stood observing her lover's suffering with an emotionless expression, even showing a strange smile as if she had just completed a work of art. Then suddenly she switched to the role of a devoted caregiver, gently bandaging the wound and coaxing with a sweet voice. "Be good now, I was just testing a little. I did this because I love you so much. Don't disappoint me again." In his pain, the victim could only nod through his tears. That night, he lay beside the person who had just tortured him, listening to sweet apologies and promises never to do it again. By October 19th, 2024, the conflict between them reached its peak. The young man, overwhelmed by fear and suffocation, gathered all his courage to break up with Sato. Hearing this, Sato screamed in rage, "How dare you leave me, you traitor!" She swung her hand, slapping her boyfriend hard across the face, her nails clawing a line across his cheek. The young man staggered backward, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, while Sato had gone mad with jealous fury. She reached into the wardrobe and pulled out a small axe that had been prepared beforehand. Sato approached her boyfriend, her eyes blazing with rage, then shouted, "I don't want you to marry another woman and wear a wedding ring." Then, thwack! The axe blade swung down, aimed directly at the young man's left hand. His ring finger segment immediately separated and flew to the floor, blood from the wound gushing out in torrents. The victim screamed in excruciating pain, collapsing to the floor as his vision blurred from shock. The small room was suddenly drenched in blood. Sato dropped the blood-stained axe, breathing heavily. She calmly bent down to pick up her boyfriend's severed finger segment, ran to the kitchen to get a glass jar. Sato filled the jar with rubbing alcohol, then dropped the finger segment in to soak. She did all this with a face as cold as if she were preserving a precious item. When finished, Sato then went to her boyfriend, who was writhing in agony, gently bandaging his wound temporarily to stop the bleeding. As she bandaged, she whispered, "Don't worry, I soaked it in alcohol to keep it clean. I'll keep this finger here in our refrigerator. You won't need to use it anymore." Sato's chilling words seemed to seal the victim's fate. From now on, she owned a part of his body and was determined to keep him for herself alone. When he regained consciousness after the shock, the young man found himself lying in bed, his left hand completely bandaged. Sato sat beside him, smiling brightly as if nothing horrific had just happened. She gently stroked his hair, whispering, "My love, from now on you belong only to me. I did all this because I love you too much." At this point, the victim's terror had reached its peak. He looked at Sato, the girl with the cute face he had once been infatuated with, and now saw only a terrifying demon. Yet he still didn't try to escape. Losing part of his finger caused him mental collapse and physical weakness, while Sato tightened her control more than ever. She quit her job entirely, staying home 24/7 just to monitor her boyfriend. All communication devices continued to be locked away, and Sato always kept the safe key on her person. The young man lived in constant dread, daily looking at his bandaged hand as a reminder that he had been branded by Sato. Occasionally, Sato would open the refrigerator, check the alcohol jar containing the finger, then turn to smile meaningfully at her boyfriend. During those moments, he could only hang his head, avoiding her gaze like avoiding a demon. The victim recounted how some nights he would wake up startled to find Sato sitting right beside his bed, staring intently at him in the darkness. Her eyes gleamed like those of someone who had lost their mind. He barely dared to sleep again, partly because his wound was aching, partly because he was haunted by the fear of what other horrific things his girlfriend might do. What was even more terrifying was that Sato would often still act gentle and caring toward her lover, like how a nurse cares for a patient, except that she had caused the patient's wounds herself. The opportunity only came on the late evening of January 28, 2025, the night the victim decided to gamble his life to call for help. That night, Sato exploded in another senseless rage, landing a punch directly to her boyfriend's face that made blood flow from his nose. The young man was nearly exhausted, but in that moment of desperation, he suddenly realized a terrifying truth. If he didn't act immediately, he might never have another chance to survive. Taking advantage of when Sato went to the bathroom, the victim searched for an old landline phone hidden under the bed. This was also the only phone that Sato hadn't thought of. His hands trembling, he dialed 110 to call the police, and from that moment, the nightmare began to end for the young man. Immediately after collecting sufficient initial evidence, police decided to arrest Saki Sato. Sato appeared surprised when an officer suddenly clicked size 8 handcuffs onto her wrists. She struggled in protest, loudly insisting that everything was a misunderstanding and that she was completely innocent. But her protests were completely meaningless because the obvious evidence in the refrigerator had already exposed Sato too clearly. Sato was escorted to the police station that very night. On the way to the station, Sato chose to remain silent, but her worried expression had begun to replace her previous cold calmness. In the cold interrogation room, Saki Sato displayed surprising composure. She firmly denied all accusations with an attitude as if discussing a matter completely unrelated to herself. Her fabricated story remained the same from the beginning. The victim had harmed himself, and she had simply preserved the finger in the refrigerator, hoping doctors could reattach it. When investigators increased pressure with rapid-fire questions, Sato initially tried to deflect with weak explanations. But when she realized she was falling into a trap, she chose complete silence, refusing to answer any other questions. Her stubbornness and cold attitude amazed even officers who had handled countless cases. Recognizing the subject's cunning, Osaka police applied a clever legal strategy. Instead of charging just one general crime, they separated each violent act into independent charges, cutting the nipple, severing the finger, and assault causing bodily harm. Each charge came with a separate arrest warrant, creating an unbreakable chain of shackles under the law. This strategy ensured Sato would be continuously detained from February 2025 until the investigation concluded, with no opportunity for bail or evidence tampering. Each time she received a new indictment decision, Sato would only silently bow her head, her face gradually showing awareness that the legal net was tightening around her. After months of meticulous investigation, authorities completed consolidating the case file. All documents and evidence were transferred to the prosecutor's office with a recommendation to prosecute Saki Sato. But before moving to the trial phase, we need to understand the real person behind Saki Sato. And you'll probably be surprised to learn the true identity of the person who committed these brutal acts. Saki Sato, born in 2001, lived in Kita Ward, Osaka. What's notable is that before falling into legal trouble, she was quite a famous figure in Japan's social media community. As a talented cosplayer, Sato had built an image completely opposite to her true nature. On social media platforms, Sato always appeared innocent and adorable when transforming into familiar anime characters. Her doll-like face and pure style had attracted a large fan base. The online community even gave her the nickname Cosplay Goddess. Thanks to her makeup talents and striking appearance, Sato had turned her passion into a profession. She earned money through image promotion, participating in cosplay events, and selling costume photo sets. But none of her fans could have imagined that behind those radiant photos lurked a terrifying demon. In public, Sato cultivated the image of a sweet, polite, and somewhat shy young woman. In private, she lived with her boyfriend in a rental apartment in Osaka. Very little information about Sato's family or past was revealed. She seemed to have never violated the law or caused any scandal before this case. People who knew her all described Sato as gentle and likable. No one suspected that behind that angelic smile lay a nature that enjoyed manipulation and violence. According to the investigation, Sato had rather deviant romantic preferences. She only liked dating younger men with compliant personalities who were easy to control, people she could completely dominate. The 21-year-old boyfriend in this case was exactly that type of person. Sato was 2 years older than him and had prominent looks and reputation that made him infatuated. She seemed to recognize this and exploited this advantage to psychologically control him. Through testimony and evidence, it's clear that Saki Sato's motive stemmed from extremely jealous psychology and desire for possession. She loved her boyfriend blindly, constantly obsessing that he would leave her for someone else. According to the victim, Sato frequently suspected him of cheating, despite having no grounds, and it was this paranoid jealousy that drove her to commit brutal acts aimed at marking ownership of her lover. Sato's act of cutting off part of her boyfriend's ring finger was clearly calculated with symbolic meaning. She wanted to ensure he could never wear another woman's wedding ring in the future. This was a rare type of criminal psychology where the perpetrator used love to justify their violence and crimes. Besides the possessive motive, Sato also revealed rarely seen cold cruelty. She could calmly torture the person she claimed to love without any mercy. Saki Sato showed that sometimes the line between passionate love and horrific crime is razor thin. With irrefutable evidence, the case file was quickly completed for transfer to the prosecution phase. On April 21st of this year, the Osaka prosecutor's office officially indicted Saki Sato on 3 charges of intentionally causing bodily harm to her boyfriend. Notably, despite the extremely brutal nature of the case, Sato was only charged with intentional bodily harm, not attempted murder or taking a life. Legal experts analyzed that the prosecution found it difficult to pursue heavier charges because the victim fortunately survived, and there was still no evidence showing Sato actually intended to take his life. However, under Japanese law, each charge of causing serious bodily harm can carry a sentence of up to 15 years in prison. With 3 combined charges like this, Sato could face a sentence of several decades, depending on the court's verdict. The trial of Saki Sato is scheduled to take place later this year, 2025, at the Osaka District Court, and we await to see what sentence this cosplayer will receive for her crimes. What do you think Sato's punishment should be? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for following along, and see you in the next video.